So I'm Leif Fixen with the Nature Conservancy and part of our North America Ag team. I'm a strategy manager for the team, and I focus in on what we call our farmer advisor strategy. And I'll get into that a little bit here. But today I am talking a little bit more broadly at first about how we applied this scaling challenge to our North America Ag strategy for achieving the goal of accelerating the adoption of regenerative ag practices. So what does that mean, regenerative ag practices? What is the change that we want to see on the landscape? Well, ultimately, it's a combination of what we call infield practices, which are these first three boxes, which is soil health-related practices, so cover crops, reduced tillage, stuff like that. The other category of infield practices that we want to get on the landscape is improved nutrient management, so being better stewards of fertilizers and manures that you use to grow crops. And the third category that we kind of think of in this whole space of regenerative ag and infield practices is related to crop rotation. So how can we diversify the crops that we're growing in the US and more broadly so that they're not so focused on either one or two crops? So those are our infield practices, the infield changes that we want to get on the landscape. The other big category of practice change that we want to see farmers adopt is what we call edge of field practices. And so that's the second line of defense of once, say, soil or nutrients or anything gets moving off the field, it's a network of practices that helps capture that sediment, those nutrients, those herbicides, those chemicals before they get into our bigger bodies of water. So all of these types of practices together ultimately are going to lead to a reduction of agriculture's impact on the environment. And so how do we do that? That's a big challenge. There's a lot of farmers, a lot of acres. We've used this process to, I guess, further refine how we're thinking about going to scale, with this practice change. And to do that, we've developed a theory of change for both our broader North America Ag program, but we've also are in the process of developing more specific theories of changes for these 5 different circles on the left side of the screen here. And I'll talk a little bit real quick, big picture about what you're looking at. The middle here is the farmer. That's our primary actor as it relates to our scaling work. Ultimately, these circles over here on the left side, those are our secondary actors. And that's really what we're going to dive into more deeply and in more detail. And those key kind of secondary actors that we've identified, and these are big groups, are farmer advisors and service providers. So, folks that a farmer talks to as they make decisions throughout the year. The next one is corporates. So corporate sustainability, both in, promoting markets that reward sustainably produced, food, as well as helping companies achieve their environmental goals, their climate goals and stuff like that. The third secondary actor is innovation. So all these new startup technologies, innovative businesses, innovative approaches, how can we help them? And the fourth one is public policy. So this is like farm bill programs or state programs. And the last one on here is farmers leading change. And so that's ultimately how can we help farmers share their experiences, make sure that we're not having the situation where everybody's got to kind of learn the same lesson that what works and doesn't work, and how can we kind of reset what is the norm for agricultural and agronomic practices on the landscape. And what has been really beneficial of going through this process is that we've really identified different approaches for each of these secondary actors that we're now building out these detailed theories of change and scaling plans for. But for the purposes of today, I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into our farmer advisor strategy and how we kind of applied that. And one of the benefits of going through this process has been that it's really helped myself kind of hone in on what is the core of our goal. And ultimately for a farmer advisor strategy, the goal is to shift the industry from being focused on making money off of selling a product, so a margin on a sale, to providing a service. And the idea there is that we're going to remove that incentive to sell more product and add an incentive to provide a better service for farmers. And we believe that that's going to lead to better stewardship of all the different types of crop inputs that we see on the landscape, help farmers tap into all the different incentive programs, whether they're corporate sustainability or farm bill public type programs. So to do that, we're kind of thinking of our work in three kind of subcategories or goals. The first one is prove and build awareness around this new services business model. And so we've got a suite of practices underneath that, projects and pilots. The next one is incentivize and de-risk those businesses kind of leading the charge here, ultimately leading the demand curve that they're seeing from their farmers, so that they don't become the next barrier as we get more farmers excited about, doing soil health, doing regenerative ag, making sure that they're just maybe a half a step ahead of the demand that farmers are asking for in this space. And the whole concept here is that it's probably not fair to ask them to take on that risk. And so looking for ways that we can help share that risk, share that leading of that edge. And the last one here is creating the enabling conditions for rapid adoption. And that's really related to making sure that agronomists are trained, there's enough equipment out on the landscape and all our different farming equipment or our agricultural communities, and making sure that there's infrastructure, right? We're not going to run out of cover crop seed. We're not going to run out of, enhanced efficiency fertilizers, stuff like that. And so, there's a lot of complexity just in this farmer advisor strategy. And one of the really great benefits of going through this process has been to map it all out. And as you see on the screen here, this is a complex map, right? This is quite the spider web. But believe it or not, this is actually helping myself and my other colleagues who are leading other strategies, and they put down what is scattered in their brains onto a piece of paper. And then we can all use common language to kind of identify how we're getting to scale and what our theories are here. And so that's been the real benefit, I think, for TNC's ag team as it relates to going through this whole process. And we're still going through it. Our farmer advisor strategy is one of the further along ones, but we're doing this for all 5 of those bubbles that you saw earlier. And so, as it relates to this process, the approach that we kind of felt was most appropriate for our farmer advisor strategy was this diffusion of innovation, right? Let's show that this can work. But ultimately, we're hoping that that's going to lead to a transformation of norms. So we want to reset what is considered normal agronomic practices. That's our long-term goal. But our intermediate kind of goal is this diffusion of innovation. And so, complicated, this is it kind of simplified, right? So, and the other thing that I'll talk about here, which was a little bit complicated for us, was, we've got 5 different secondary actors that are trying to influence a primary actor, right? As we are learning from this scaling process. But ultimately, we need to get the farmers to start changing. So we need to get this sufficient demand curve going. So, so as we do that, we kind of decided, all right, well, let's lay this out in a linear line of to-dos, right? Well, ultimately, we need to build awareness around the role that farmer advisors play in accelerating the adoption of conservation practices. And we've done a pretty good job of communicating and demonstrating that. But then it's how do we get them to get involved? And so that's this de-risk shift to the new business model. And once we get them convinced to go to this new business model, and hopefully we've got the farmer demand curve coming, then we need to make sure we have capacity input. And that's both the equipment and the training capacities. And ultimately, if we do all of that right, we're going to see progress from our primary actor, i.e. the farmer, towards our goals of, our goal is 50% of acres, row crop acres in the U.S. adopting regenerative ag practices. But we're not just going to trust that we're getting it. We're going to do research on whether or not we're getting it, and then create that feedback loop into sufficient demand. I put stars. So the other thing that this process has really helped me do as it relates to our strategy is we've done a good job of building awareness, we've done a good job of training and education, and we've done a good job of research on progress and barriers to farmer advisors. What this has highlighted is that we need to accelerate the work that we're starting on this whole de-risking the business model and better identifying it and demonstrating it. And we weren't really focused at all about the equipment and the capital kind of piece of all this. And so, those were kind of two gaps or blind spots that I had coming into this, that this process has helped me kind of realize. And those ultimately came out of this as we were trying to, map all this out. I was like, well, no, it's actually this and that. And anyway, so strongly encourage you to do that. My last slide here is just kind of what our next steps are and kind of okay, what are we going to do with this knowledge and these tools? It's, for me, it's going to be going back to both of these and kind of mapping out, we already kind of have a map of where we're working, but also I think, what we're hoping to do is to turn this theory of change and this scaling model into a shared document that industry and other partners can get behind and we can kind of organize around, so that ultimately it's not like TNC's theory of change, but like, here is how we in the US can get farmer advisors more on board with regenerative ag practices. And so I think the first step of that is kind of mapping out who's doing what and where, and then seeing if we've got any glaring gaps that we need to call attention to. I think, that kind of leads into the second step of here of prioritizing our focus. What should we lead on? What should we support? What should we just point out as a problem and let somebody else deal with it? We've already kind of identified through this process that we really need to accelerate our business model and showing that this can work on the landscape. And then kind of tying into that shared vision, right? Identify where there's investment opportunities for foundations, for governments, for industry, and say, here are places that you can be strategic with your investments. And that kind of hopefully will all get created into an executive summary, shared call to action as it relates to that. So that's it in a nutshell. It's been a great process to go through. It's taken a little bit of patience because this is you got to kind of change your thought process. For those of you thinking about going through it, commit to it. Dive in. These aren't permanent documents, so you can kind of meld them into what you want. It's been really good at giving us common language across our different strategies or those secondary actors on our primary actor group, which is the farmer. So thank you.